What is up, ladies and gentlemen? You are listening to the Rebel by Design Wrestling podcast. You are listening to episode number 22. On this episode, we are going to be talking about TNA Wrestling. And the reason why I wanted to do this episode was mainly because as of this recording, TNA Wrestling is about ready to make their debut on AMC this Thursday, which is a huge deal in the wrestling industry. See TNA making their rise to a major television network. So, before we get into that, I want to thank everybody for the support for the last year or so for this podcast. We have uh, just passed the 1 year anniversary of the very first episode I've done, and I know I haven't been very frequent with my episodes at this time, but in 2026, I do plan on doing a lot more, be more back on my normal schedule. I hope, um, and hopefully have some more great guests coming through here and other things and other changes that I've got in the works. Um, so stay tuned for that. But so now getting to this episode, TNA Wrestling is a company that has had its ups and downs. I have followed it pretty much from since day one, um, and through the time I had accessibility to the show. So my experience of TNA, it has had its ups and downs, as we all know. That's why they've been in the position they were. Um, so on this episode, I'm going to share some memories about it. I'm going to also share some thoughts about what we're about to break on, and among other things. Um, so what does this mean for the wrestling? Let's start with there. Uh, TNA Wrestling debuting on AMC this Thursday, as of the recording. Is a monumental event that having a third pro wrestling company on a major television network in the United States in 2026. Um, it's a very big thing for the wrestling industry. Um, as somebody who follows all kinds of wrestling, and somebody who does not partake in the whole tribalistic elements that social media has very much so more than anywhere else that I've seen has really drawn that line in the sand, so to speak. Um, I'm happy for TNA. TNA has went through a lot since the beginning, and through it all, it managed to find a way to survive, and that's something that's very hard to do, especially for over 20 years now that the company has existed. It has overcame a lot of obstacles, and it should be known that going through all these obstacles they have, that other wrestling companies have gone through themselves and survived. Uh, a lot of them have. WWE has had tough times. Uh, if you think about where WWE was in the mid '90s before the Attitude Era started, they had their struggles. They were doing TV through at little legitimate high school gyms and so forth. That's how bad WWE at one point got, but they managed to bounce back and overcome it. TNA has gone through. We're going to talk about what all that TNA has gone through. So anybody out there who are anti AEW for whatever your weird reason is, and thinking, oh yeah, they're going to fail and go out of business because their numbers are not showing what they used to. The company's only 6 years old. Keep that in mind. Uh, and saying that, as long as the Khan family is willing to put money in that company, it's going to be around some shape, way, or form. That's just the reality of it. And looking at the TNA history, you gotta think about this. When TNA first started in 2002, uh, by the Jarrett family, Jeff and Jerry Jarrett, they had and they had a financial backing to help with it that backed out, and things became a mess. And as fast as they started, they almost went out of business. Just as fast. They they, they were set to go out of business within the first couple of months of existence. Then the Carter family got involved. Uh, to help them stay afloat. Otherwise, they would have been out of business within the first year without the Carter family. Uh, and Panda Energy. Now, people would like to dog on Dixie Carter a lot, which a lot of it is kind of deserved in the long term. Uh, but the reality is that without her and her family, TNA we would not be here today in 2026 talking about TNA and their big debut on AMC this week. It will be done and gone, and who knows how big of an impact that would have changed the entire wrestling industry if that hadn't happened. Because you gotta keep in mind, they were the only other company besides WWE that were even remotely trying to attempt to be on television. Because by the time TNA started, you know, the XWF that was Jimmy Hart and had Hulk Hogan at the very beginning, they were already gone. Ring of Honor, without the financial backing, was just a small independent company up in the northeast that was just starting about the same time as uh, TNA did. MOW had their first go around, which just started within that same year or the following year. Then you had the overseas stuff with WWA that, again, did not last. It wound up pretty much merging into TNA by 2023. And when you look at all these different elements and how many companies tried to be the next WCW or next major company to challenge WWE, how many of them were very short-lived and end up failing? But through all of that, TNA managed to find ways to survive. And as well as acquire a lot of major names in the wrestling industry over the years. The who's who of wrestling that went through the TNA ranks is amazing. From big name star power that we already knew, and to talent that they development and who became major names in their company and continue to remain major names in the industry through the company. So you think about it, in the first year of TNA, we all know Jeff Jarrett was the main focus. Partly since he was part owner of the company, he was the reliable and biggest name in the early days. You had Scott Hall, who was in and out of the company, and yeah, big name, but again, wasn't around every single week to be reliable big name. They brought in guys like Sabu for a couple of spots. They had Kid Shamrock for a little bit. Uh, they were the company that presented Ron Killing to R-Truth, who was coming off his K Quick run, into a main event player. And he did very well with that role. A highly underrated role, and it's highly suggested. If you go back and find the early days of TNA, I highly suggest watching the R-Truth stuff. Or the Ron Truth Killing stuff from the early days. Because he really showed what he could really do. Because a lot of people know just the comedy character in WWE, and we really hadn't gotten a chance to really see the serious side of R-Truth that much in WWE, except for that short heel run he did with feud with the Miz, and before they had that feud with John Cena. But it was such a short period of time that we really had a good chance of really you know go deep with that. I always felt that they always scratched the surface with what R-Truth really can do as a heel. Um, but when you think about all the other things that they have established and done, they were the company that really allowed AJ Styles to become an unknown guy and into a main event guy for the remainder of his career. They pushed him to that level that when he left TNA, he went to Japan, continued to be a main event guy. Eventually, he wound up to WWE, where again he was a top guy for a number of years, and still was a top name in the company. Even though is currently winding down his career, but he had a Hall of Fame WWE career. If not, and when he came into WWE, he already had a Hall of Fame wrestling career. Um, and because he it was that he was that decorated as an athlete all over the wrestling world. And he conquered New Japan. He wore every title he was eligible for in TNA. He wore that existed in the time that he was there. He was their franchise for a number of years, and it's crazy to think that they didn't think to keep him, or were worth the money that he deserved to stay there. You know, that's just crazy to me. It really is. But you think about everybody else that came through, like James Storm was a nobody, ended up having a heck of a career, you know, with two very successful tag teams. But AMW, which was like the first teams that they put together, to Beer Money was even more successful in my opinion, and also brought Bobby Roode along, who ended up having a run in WWE afterwards, and had a very popular character in NXT, especially with the Glorious gimmick. Uh, One of the current tag teams that they signed last year, the Motor City Machine Guns, they were put together in TNA. Both guys had, Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley, both had highly successful careers in TNA, both as singles and a tag team. Um, the list goes on and on. And you think about, Kurt Angle's career, Sting's career in TNA, both very, you know, had, Kurt Angle, TNA career goes up just as good as any match that he had in WWE. Both, there were two Hall of Fame worthy runs in Kurt Angle's career. His WWE run, his first, not counting his retirement run, but his first full time main event, main run, and his run to TNA are both Hall of Fame worthy careers. You know, we saw Sting make his comeback after WCW went out of business. He had an amazing run in the company, and he put a lot into it. Um, Jeff Hardy had his ups and downs in the company, but when he was on his game, he had some amazing, incredible moments in that company. Um, so going for a format that was never seen before, the weekly pay per views. Going from that to a Fox Sports channels, and then finally the biggest deal that they have had, TV deal they have had is Spike TV. Uh, for a number of years, they were there drawing what we consider today in today's world very respectable ratings. And then issues happened, and where they cost them their Spike TV deal that they were on Destination America and Pop, which I had Destination America, but I don't think I had Pop. Were able to watch that was starting to decline of me getting access to TNA Wrestling, and TNA was not the same TNA that I remember because all the big names were leaving. Um, so the post, first it was AJ Styles, then it was Samoa Joe, um, then Sting left, then I may be a little out of order. Kurt Angle was like the last major name there for a moment, but they were still able to find ways, to bring in. They had like Bobby Lashley, who uh, probably had one of his best runs in the wrestling period in that time in TNA, where um, he was known as the walking what was his nickname? Walking Armageddon. It was still another team but tough. That whole run when he was the guy in TNA really brought out what Bobby Lashley could be as a character. And he was just out there doing his thing as a complete package. We saw the development of EC3. We saw that when and all the different issues that the company ended up having. Where we are today cannot be possible. With a lot of certain people that deserve a lot of credit. When Anthem first bought the company, it was basically I always use this analogy when I describe what TNA was when Anthem and Scott D'Amore took over the company. TNA was basically a pile of rubber that was left behind by Dixie Carter and her group. As good as she was for that company, she's also one of the worst things that happened to the company when all the money dried up. It was a pile of rubble. Wasn't drawing anybody in, and lost a lot of the fandom that the company had. Quit on the company because they lost their trust in them. So Anthem taking over had an uphill battle, and with Scott D'Amore at the helm, was slowly but surely, brick by brick, rebuilt this company. And he did it in a way where it wasn't relying on the big names. There were familiar faces that we kind of knew who they were from WWE or wherever, but they weren't like the top on the top guys. You know what I mean? And for the longest time, that's how it was. Everything else was pretty much, we gotta develop our own talent, our main event guys, and they did a heck of a job doing so. When you think about Moose, you think about Josh Alexander was one of the bigger ones. Guys who were so good, but no one really knew who they were, and ended up being so successful that they signed with AEW for a bigger contract recently. Josh Alexander was one of those guys. Brian Cage, former world champion there, wasn't very as known in the mainstream wrestling world, but on the indie at the time. But he was brought in, made world champion. Sami Callihan, was another guy. They brought back the Motor City Machine Guns, and they both had another great run as both solo and as a tag team. Both had world title runs again, and exhibition title run and tag team title runs. They were familiar faces to the TNA audience, and still were delivering in their ring. And they continue to do. We saw Eric Young come in and out. Kazarian in and out. He was there. He left for AEW because he came back from AEW. Currently going into Thursday as the world champion, by the way. Prior to the Powerful, Santina and Ortiz, they were a tag team before AEW started in TNA. Went to TNA, having a fallout, and Santana's now going solo in TNA, and is main eventing. And has a very bright future in the company. And you look at everybody else who kind of popped in there and ended up going on inside of big contracts. The Lucha Brothers, Penta, and Ray Phoenix were a tag team as well as Penta being a world champion there. that was just before AEW got started, and around the time that All In was still just had happened. We saw Cody have a brief run there as a top guy, and we're seeing the rise of him becoming a top guy, to say, before he went up to Japan, among other places, and Ring of Honor and so forth. And the list continues going on and on. And through all the pandemic's hurt a lot of companies. TNA fought through that. Much like AEW, WWE, where it was one of the other few places out there that you were still able to find work at an operational wrestling company, beginning because they had the TV obligations to fulfill. Being that Anthem also owned Access TV allowed TNA to be consistently having some kind of TV deal. Access TV was not as accessible to a lot of people as the previous networks they were on, especially Spike, but it was better than nothing, and they made the most of that between that pay-per-views and special events. And again, like I said, through all those different times, we saw slow but surely build up to this point to where we're at now. Because without Scott D'Amore, who knows where they would have been without him doing all the extremely hard work to rebuild the fan base, to rebuild, the company to what it was, to where it's now. And even post Scott D'Amore, the company continued to rise, continued to show the growth. But Scott D'Amore started a lot of this stuff. And I know that's why I speak so highly of him, because he was the first that got the ability to get Mickey James and Jordy Gray's into Royal Rumbles, and then the partnership started through Scott D'Amore, and it's continuing to become bigger and stronger post Scott D'Amore. The partnership between WWE with NXT and TNA that has made for a lot of interesting things that have gone on. That was very unique in the wrestling industry that you haven't seen in quite some time. And when you see this stuff and you go, and you see like the guys like Joe Henry becoming, so popular throughout the social media and everything, became a meme and everything, but became one of the most popular acts in TNA to the point where now WWE has swamped him up. And you look at that kind of stuff, and you see again, Joe Henry was another guy that Scott D'Amore originally brought in. And you look at the biggest name that Scott D'Amore ever got to bring in during his period of time was toward the later part of his run. And that's when they were able to secure the Hardys after their post AEW run, and bringing in like Dolph Ziggler. But you see all that, and you see the progress. And last year you saw, TNA do things that they haven't done ever. They broke their all-time U.S. attendance record last year, and that's just great for wrestling as a whole when you see that company achieve those success levels. I'm not going to consider today TNA is the number 2 wrestling company in the United States. Some people on social media will say that more so to troll AEW fans. But there's no matrix that matches up to that. To be brutally honest, but TNA has really got a lot of excitement going for them. They have momentum in their favor because of the excitement of the progress they have made in the last year, and on top of that, debuting this Thursday on AMC, their biggest network they have had since Spike. And being this accessible to the audience. the U.S. audience, the majority of people who have a streaming service or some kind of cable satellite provider, we get AMC. The AMC is way more accessible than any other network they have had since Spike TV. And they're up there, they're not far behind uh, accessibility these days compared to, TBS, TNT, and the USA Network. TBS, TNT, and the USA are still bigger, but not usually bigger than AMC is. So the accessibility is there, and it's going to be interesting to see what kind of numbers they pull in for their debut show on AMC. More so, who may not show up. I'm sure they're going to have a lot of surprises planned. We know AJ Styles is going to be there from WWE. So far as it sounded, it's just an appearance and not a match. But being that AJ Styles is on a pretty much on his last year of his full as an active wrestler, I would love to see AJ Styles at least have two matches, in TNA in this final year. For me, the two matches I would want to see would be I love to see him go against a rival slash running buddy they have had for many years in TNA, the current world champion Kazarian. I want to see him have it one more time. The other one would be somebody who would be more of a I feel like more of a passionate tour style moment because the guys Slater, the current X Division champion, is somebody that a lot of people label as the next coming of AJ Styles in a lot of ways, as far as the kind of performer he is. And we already saw kind of a hint kind of thing of AJ Styles kind of putting over and putting him over at Battle for Glory. But I just think that it would be an incredible match and moment for Slater if they actually had that match with him and AJ. Yeah, I definitely would love to see it. If AJ Styles would be allowed to do two matches in TNA, those were the two I would love to see. Him and Kazarian one more time, and him and Leon Slater for the first time would be an incredible thing. But I definitely let me see interesting who may show up. The card looks very good. Could this be the opportunity where they can hit a home run and put Santana as champion again? And finally give him the run that he really does deserve? I know they want to make the first 80, the show extremely very big. They need to. They need to hit a home run for a debut show and kind of treat it as if it was a pay-per-view / PLE. Call what you want to call it. And another kind of treat it that way, and they should. Because you want to, put the best foot forward on their debut show on the network and show the world that, TNA is here and we mean business, And shoot for the stars. Now, do I expect him to get more ratings, a higher rating than AEW? I don't. My prediction is going to be between 3 to 400,000 is my prediction. AEW last week past show got like 500K. That's kind of where I'm guessing, but I'd be happily thrilled and surprised at all one if they surpassed AEW. But I also mean they would probably have to almost surpass NXT as well. NXT it's been getting around between 600,000 to 700,000 lately. So to think that TNA gets above AEW and kind of in between AEW and NXT, that would be very interesting to see. But on a safer note, I say between 3 to 400 K. Currently, they barely just break 100K on access on the current network Access TV. So you got to think about that 100 making the crossover, which I'm sure most of those guys have people already have. You know, AMC. Now, whoever watches from TNA Plus and the other ways that you get Impact, um, they'll be coming over. So I don't know how many more that really is off the top of my head. Um, but we'll be seeing a lot of interesting to see what kind of number they do bring in. That's my prediction, but I could be wrong. It could be higher. I hope it is higher. You know, but even though these are all shows aired on different nights, I do like to compare them in that way, but I don't call it a war. To me, a TV war, ratings war between two wrestling companies, they had to air on the same night at the same time. Like people still love to compare NXT to AEW's numbers every single week, and claim that like to have a victory claim that yeah, all this time TNA has been NXT has been AEW. Like on a head, which in reality is like to me that war ended when as soon as NXT went to Tuesday. Nobody compared like back in the day when I was watching the Monday Night Wars. Okay, that's why it was called the Monday Night Wars because Raw and Nitro aired on the same night, head to head. Nobody compared uh, SmackDown to Thunder. Nobody compared uh, Thunder to Sunday Night Heat or any other weekend show to Sunday Night Heat that WCW actually had. Nobody compared those numbers. Nobody talked about those numbers. So why are we comparing two shows on different nights and call it a war? It's weird to me. It always has been. Sure, we can compare numbers and say, well, they did a lot. That way, yeah, they did better, but you know what? They weren't head to head. They weren't two companies fighting for the same audience of the wrestling fan. That's the big difference than what it was we saw when AEW first started and NXT went head to head with them. So all that has changed now because they ain't the same no more. Because they're not going head to head anymore. But people still want to call it a war. I'm like, that war ended. Technically, in the technicality, AEW won that war, unfortunately. Now, yeah, NXT's beating AEW now on network television compared to cable, but nobody knows how many people are watching it on streaming services on HBO Max. I don't know that number. Nobody knows that number. People want to guess, and that's fine, but there's been no concrete evidence that, of what the numbers actually are. People say it's 500K. I don't know if that's true. I can't prove that. Uh, People, Tony Khan never really flat out said, that's what I heard, but he never said he got concrete evidence on that. But TNA has it's going to be interesting what TNA does and how much of the debut audience continues to watch from week to week. Can they grow that audience? Is the next step after that? Um, maintaining and growing is what will be the thing that TNA will be focused on doing after their debut. So it'll be interesting how they do that. How well they come up with great stories and match combinations to keep the fans tuned, keep me in tune. We want to continue to watch from week to week. Uh, it's gonna be hard because I got everything I got going on, including trying to record a podcast and everything else. But I am going to keep an eye on it. I am going to do the same thing I do with AEW and Raw and SmackDown. If I can't sit there have the time to sit there and watch the entire episode, I'm going to be sure I get the bullet point highlights of the show. Go back and watch the matches that I really need to watch, and so forth. But I'm excited for it. Wrestling fans should be excited for Thursday. They should be hyped up for it. Because for TNA Wrestling and wrestling it's been a long time coming. And a lot of these people on that roster have busted their ass for a number of years to make this company to what it is now. And there's a lot of people behind the scenes that deserve also the same kind of credit. People who no longer want that company anymore deserve a lot of credit, like Scott D'Amore, Joe Henry, who has left, and a lot of other talents who were there and left, but like Josh Alexander and so forth, who added the credibility back to that company over the years. It's been a long time coming. It's been a long, slow process from when Anthem took over this company to where it is now. It's seen a lot of ups and downs over the years. We've seen this company at the lowest of lows that survived multiple times that many people thought it was the end and that was going out of business, but it always found a way to come back. And I say that about any wrestling company. Until the doors are actually closed, never say never of them being able to come back. And TNA has shown that, even though it was an ownership change, it found a way to get back and get to this point, and it's a very exciting point, and it should lead to a very exciting year for TNA Wrestling. We are dawning a new era for TNA Wrestling, and it's a very exciting year, and I'm excited for it, and I'm happy for all the talent in that company that has played their roles to help this company get to where they're at. So, stay tuned. I'll probably be doing a follow up at some point. Give you my thoughts and opinions after maybe, let's just say, I'll give them a month and I'll kind of go back for the first month of their show to see what I thought about it. How what was really getting me excited. What do I like? What I don't like? So know this that TNA has had one of the better women's wrestling divisions in the last few years. It's been one of their strong points. But I definitely am curious to see who else is brought in, who shows up. Who gets signed to contracts and stuff like that as well. Because it was announced today, I think Cedric Alexander signed a new deal. The Hardys resigned. To me, that was a key element. Because a lot of new, wrestling fans who want to check it out for the first time or had checked them out for a while. They always love familiar faces to keep it out, to kind of bring them in a little bit. And then everybody else on the roster that are not as known as the Hardys are, they put on a good performance to hey, I want to see more of that guy. And then TNA had a lot of talent like that, where you may not necessarily know who they are much now because of only being on Access TV, but now they're on this bigger stage. there is going to be a lot of talent that are going to get recognized and noticed a lot more, and hopefully that also leads to a lot of people want to come back and see more of them. They have a lot of those kind of levels of talent on that roster. So I am very excited to see what comes of the show. Um, but this is going to conclude this episode of the Rebels by the Rebels by Design Wrestling podcast. I want to thank you everyone who has watched this on YouTube or listens to me on wherever you get your audio podcast from. I always appreciate the support. And you have been listening to the Rebel by Design Wrestling podcast, episode number 22. With that, man, I am signing off and have a great, and I'll see you in episode number 23. Goodbye, everyone.